Welcome back to another week of the Knowledge Bomb. I'm Nick Fowler, and this week's episode, we're going to follow up on a previous episode where I asked you to categorize and list your 2017 performance limiters. All right, so we're going to start diving into a pretty in-depth series about how to set up a plan for 2018, if you will, right? Or what's left of 2017 moving forward as an athlete for yourself. The first thing we need to talk about is how to set up your training. The way I like to do it is in a seasonal approach, right? We need to figure out what you want to be focusing on and what you need to be focusing on at different points during your year. So the first thing we need to do is set up the overall plan. What you need to consider is your end goal, right? What is your goal? First thing to do is always start with your goal and ideally try to get a timeline around that. So if it's, let's just say, let's say you're gonna compete in January of 2018. So then we've already set your end goal, and now we can work backwards. Why this is important is that we can now look at the time between now and the goal, whether it's a year, 2 years from now, and start to create seasons out of it. A season doesn't have to be a certain length of time. It just denotes a certain focus within a training period, right? So the first thing that we want to look at is a postseason phase, if you will. And so in this postseason phase, we're looking at deloading, we're looking at focusing on structural work, we're looking at focusing on the pieces that might be sport dependent. And what I mean by that is that this is the time to look at what you've done, right? In the sport of CrossFit, shoulders and hips tend to be pretty beat up after competition season, after the open, regionals, the games, whatever it might be. So these are the pieces that would be sport specific there. If you're a runner, obviously knees, pelvis, that might be another area that you might consider. And the reason we want to look at that in a sport specific nature is to really identify this type of stress that you've incurred throughout your training, throughout your competition season. So we need to heal, we need to look at producing some structural balance, laying a foundation for the months to come, if that makes sense. So the next block of time we want to consider is the off season. The off season is going to be our biggest chunk of time where we can get the most amount of work done. This usually lasts months, if not years, for some athletes, right? This is where a slow increase in volume is going to take place, where structural and absolute strength can become the priority, where we're focusing on getting strong. Intensity is going to be moderated through the design, meaning that we want to make sure that our intensity isn't to the point where it starts to overtake other priorities, right? As soon as we up our intensity, usually our ability to just get a lot of work in diminishes, right? There's always this balance between intensity and volume. And usually if intensity goes up, volume is going to come down. And if volume's going up, intensity has to come down. It's just we can only handle so much stress. And those are just two ways to kind of measure the types of stress within your program, right? So still intensity is pretty moderated, maybe once, twice a week you're going hard. The rest of the time is really just putting in the work, right? A lot of what happens in the off season is testing. I'm a huge fan of testing. We should never just be guessing about what's happening and where we're at and the changes and the type of training that we should actually have in our program. So this is a time period where, looking at old benchmarks, right? Reestablishing 1RMs, just seeing where you are and building intelligent training off of that is really, really important. Moving out of the off season, we're looking at a preseason. Now our preseason is just a shorter window to really start to bring up intensity, right? Volume is still gonna be high, but this is an opportunity to take all the pieces we've been working on and put them together in a more of a sport-specific environment, if that makes sense. So it's going to start feeling, tasting, like your sport, if that makes sense. So these are where micro and mesocycles tend to be the focus. So the week in, week out, the progressions within those weeks become very, very important. This is a great opportunity to start building resiliency. And what I mean by physical resiliency is your ability to recover, essentially. We want you to be able to go into a training session or two in a day and be able to recover to where the next day, maybe you're not 100%, but you're feeling pretty good and you can train. At this point, the preseason, you should be acclimated to volume, intensity's coming up, and you should be able to start increasing your ability to recover through your training sessions. After a preseason, we're looking at peaking season, and this is basically where all the little pieces start to come together. Our volume is going to decrease just a little bit to allow an increase in intensity. And what this might look like is, instead of going for a 5x5 back squat, you might just build to a 3RM, for instance. We might be taking the IWTs or the the blocks of 10-minute AMRAPs that you guys have been experiencing, where it's 30 minutes of work, and now we're paring it down. We're asking you to do maybe one 10-minute AMRAP of 12 minutes of work, right? So you can see volume decreasing, but in order for this peaking season to be successful, intensity needs to replace the decreasing volume. Skill refinement. This is a place where all the work that we've been doing, muscle endurance, your physical resiliency, your aerobic capacity, your strength, has laid a foundation to where now those skills can be refined and practiced on often, right? You're going to be able to recover from them, you're going to be able to refine it. And when I say skill refinement, it's really sport dependent, and it's also limiter dependent, right? So all these things you've been working on and all these pieces that you've identified in the postseason, this is an opportunity to really see what you have in you because you've been doing a lot of the work. Testing and refinement of systems. And so what I mean by that is we still want to be testing through here, probably not as frequently, but we just want to make sure that, like, okay, are we right where we want to be, right? So you can think about it as little changes that we're going to make. We're not going to, at this point, make any big changes within your training or how you do things, if that makes sense. So if you're one that sees a lot of gains out of, let's say, lower rest, higher rep strength training, we don't want to just go ahead and switch that on you, if that makes sense. So peaking season, it's really where a lot of everything should come together in preparation for competition. Now, in season, what I mean about when I say in season, it's your competition season. It's from maybe the week before a competition to maybe a week after. Now, depending on your goal, your season could last 12 weeks. It could last 1 week. It could last 5 weeks for you guys who just went through the Open, or it could actually be a 6-month-long season for those of you guys maybe who are unexpectedly making progress and making it to the next stage. But typically, we kind of know what our season is going to be. A really good example of this is that if you've every year you've made it through the Open and you've made it to regionals and your goal is to make it to the games, you are a regional athlete, right? You want to peak for regionals. The in-season opportunity that we have is to take everything that we've done and allow you to peak physically, mentally. Everything should just kind of come together for you, the best possible performances in that time period. The longer the season, the harder it is to peak, if that makes sense. And so really the focus should be on what is the stage of competition that you're trying to get past. So the focus is sport. It's also maintenance. We want to make sure that we maintain everything that we've worked so hard on and been building for the past 6 months, year, 2 years, whatever that might look like. And there's a huge premium on staying healthy. There should be no injuries at this point. And so that means that, as an example, is if you've never gone skiing before, this is not the time to maybe try skiing for the first time. Trying to take a more conservative approach. Things like maybe dodgeball might not be a great idea at this point. So really focus on the sport at hand. We want to include a lot of maintenance and really focus on staying healthy through the competition season, right? So after an in-season period, then we wrap back around and now we're at postseason. So you can kind of see this seasonal approach really lends itself to being able to plan out your year, your 2 years, to allow you to achieve your goal in a progressive manner, right? We can't just do the same things over and over and over again and expect different results, right? If you do a 5x5 back squat every day, or let's just say every week for a year, you're gonna get the same results. We need to find a way to progress that out. I'll go into detail in future episodes about how to progress those things out based on the limiters you have. If you haven't seen that video, I would definitely recommend going to check it out before you watch any of the further videos here in the next couple months.